Fluency is a concept that many people equate with foreign language proficiency. For example, we might describe a bilingual person as being fluent in two languages. However, fluency as a literacy concept carries a different meaning. If asked what it means to be a fluent reader, you might explain the term by describing the ease and flow with which a person reads aloud. This definition is only partly correct. When students are asked to read aloud in class, they are experiencing a fluency building exercise. However, it's important to recognize that when students are asked to read aloud, they may not be focusing on reading comprehension. Instead, they're working on decoding skills, rate, rhythm, intonation, and emphasis. That's a high cognitive demand for learners who have not yet mastered the language or the relevant content in the lesson. Fluency as a literacy concept involves engaging a variety of interrelated skills when reading aloud or silently to elicit meaning and foster comprehension. Have you ever noticed that students whose English is not well developed often hate to read aloud in class? What about learners who accidentally skip lines when reading aloud or lose their place altogether? Have you ever had a student who could read aloud beautifully, but who could then not tell you any details about what he just read? These observations hint at the possibility that fluency issues might be interfering with learner progress. Clearly, fluency can dramatically impact a student's access to and engagement with written text. You may find that students who are struggling with reading fluency often lose confidence and disengage from the subject matter. Fluency issues also affect silent reading. Take a moment to silently read a line from Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening in a variety of languages. These are all native languages spoken by children in Oklahoma schools. Since the vocabulary is well known, and you probably already have a good contextual understanding of this famous poem, you can use this time to focus exclusively on your fluency skills. What linguistic barriers might prevent you from reading the sentences fluently? Would you be more capable reading them silently or aloud? Would you be comfortable reading them to a partner or in a whole group setting? How long do you think you could read silently before you grew tired of processing so much information? Even though these languages generally use the same alphabet, their punctuation, phonemics, intonation, rhythm, emphasis, and word order must all be processed in order for you to meaningfully interact with the text. Sometimes you'll hear students say that they understood what was read when they were following along in class, but when they got home and tried to reread the same material, it didn't make any sense. What they may actually be trying to tell you is that they are struggling with fluency, and as an extension, with comprehension. This module will help you understand fluency instruction and why it's important to effective standards-based lesson delivery. In addition, it will provide you with strategies, tips, and theories that can help you teach all language learners. As you progress through this lesson, use the graphic organizer provided to make a list of strategies that could be incorporated into your standards-based lesson plans in order to promote fluency as a literacy skill. Reading fluently is the essential link from word recognition to comprehension. This key element of literacy development involves a variety of skills, including appropriate reading rate, prosody, automaticity, freedom from decoding problems, and appropriate attention to punctuation. Let's take a quick look at these component parts to better understand what's at play when students are developing fluency. Appropriate reading rate is an often misunderstood concept. According to researchers, a student's appropriate reading rate is the speed at which he can comprehend text during silent reading or express ideas when reading aloud. How quickly a student reads is not an indicator of whether he is fluent. This is a critical distinction that bears repeating. Reading speed is not the same as reading rate. Because DIBELS and other widely used assessments measure rate of reading, reading speed has frequently become overemphasized as a fluency assessment practice to the detriment of comprehension. Since reading comprehension is the ultimate goal of literacy instruction, it is important that the strategies we use to teach and assess fluency help us meet this end. The idea that students should read at a rate that facilitates comprehension has important implications for ELLs. Second language acquisition researchers widely recognize that ELLs who feel pressured, anxious, or pushed to perform linguistically beyond their actual English proficiency levels frequently disengage from the learning process. If you can approach reading rate with the goal of fluency for the sake of comprehension in mind, you can take a more strategic approach to the types of assignments, activities, and reading selections that you pick for students as part of your planning. Prosody is essentially expressive reading. If you read to your students with dramatic flair, assign voices to the characters in your stories during read-alouds, encourage students to read the same story aloud several times, or use reader's theater as a classroom activity, then you're encouraging this important skill. It's interesting to know that researchers have found strong links between oral reading prosody and general reading achievement. We know that proficient users of English generally develop prosody between grades 1 and 5, a phenomenon that is reflected in the Common Core standards for those grade levels. However, for ELLs, whose native languages might follow different patterns of timing, intonation, emphasis, phrasing, and punctuation, special attention to prosody is warranted. Our simple fluency exercise using a line of Frost's famous poem helps us recognize the high cognitive demand that this prosody requires. While you subconsciously use knowledge from your native language to synthesize the information so that you could read the sentences correctly and with expression, you probably realize that not all of the skills needed to demonstrate mastery could be transferred across languages. When developing prosody, students need to both see and hear models of spoken and written English. They also need to be actively engaged in listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills to support subject area knowledge in ways that might help them internalize the way English sounds and the cues we use to make relevant distinctions in oral language. Two features of fluency that go hand in hand are accuracy and automaticity. Accuracy means being able to pronounce or sound out a word, and also knowing the word's meaning. When a student learns a new vocabulary word, you expect him to recognize the word, pronounce it correctly, and know what the word means. In short, you're expecting word accuracy. Automaticity, on the other hand, refers to tasks that can be performed without attention or conscious effort. When a student learns high-frequency words such as the, and most, and can recognize them immediately in text, he is practicing automaticity. Students whose oral fluency sounds choppy may be struggling with accuracy or automaticity. In the early grades, we observe children as they shift their focus from reading sounds to words and eventually to sentences and paragraphs. Sometimes students become word-bound. They struggle to move beyond the word-level focus, which can significantly diminish their fluency and reading comprehension. This may be because of the heavy emphasis on phonics instruction that is common in the early grades. A strategy known as chunking, or breaking written language into manageable parts or idea clusters, is commonly used to help young readers build fluency with respect to accuracy and automaticity. The same strategy can be used with older students. Let's return to Frost's poem for a moment. As you read silently, your first step was probably to focus on each word in the foreign language samples. Next, you probably read the sentences through a few times, using what you know about literacy and the sounds of those languages to analyze how the sentence might sound when read as a whole. If a more proficient user of those languages chunked the information while modeling its pronunciation, flow, and emphasis, you could probably repeat the chunk with a high degree of accuracy. If the teacher were to increase the size of the chunk by adding new sentences, you would very likely be able to automatize the flow of the poetry and develop a better working knowledge of the new vocabulary to which you've been exposed. ELLs who subconsciously memorize common English phrases and expressions as an intuitive part of the second language acquisition process already use this strategy with spoken language. When applying this concept to literacy development, it is important that students interact with text that is at or below their independent reading levels. A student's independent reading level is the level at which he can read without instructional support with 95 to 100% accuracy and satisfactory or excellent comprehension. By contrast, a student's instructional reading level is the highest text level a student can read with 90 to 94% accuracy and satisfactory or excellent comprehension. This explains why children can sometimes manage an assigned reading task while at school, but they cannot achieve the same level of reading success at home. Helping students find appropriately leveled texts and practice at their independent reading levels while away from school, and using a combination of independent and instructional reading in the classroom can yield great rewards. However, this may require the use of modified texts for ELLs or for other struggling readers. Word study is another strategy that helps struggling learners improve their accuracy and automaticity. By helping students expand the vocabularies that we discussed in the previous module and make meaningful connections between word knowledge, word families, and their use, we can improve their ability to retrieve and utilize new language to enhance fluency. You can use mind maps and other types of graphic organizers, semantic feature analysis, categorical word walls, video segments with printable transcripts or closed captioning, recorded books, and high-low readers, which are high-interest books that use simplified English, to promote fluency by attending to word accuracy and automaticity. If you are fortunate enough to have iPads in your classroom, or students who have access to iPads at home, you can encourage technology use for the purpose of fluency development. Simply ask students to record themselves while reading aloud. Then have them play back their recordings. When readers hear themselves reading aloud, it helps them recognize and respond to their own fluency errors. Another great technology tool for building both vocabulary and fluency is the Kindle e-reader, which has a built-in dictionary, thus allowing students to check the meaning of new words used in context with little interruption to the reading process. Most Kindle e-readers have a text-to-speech feature that will allow a person to hear the story being read as he follows along. If you don't already use these strategies as part of your teaching, you can select and incorporate a few of them to immediately help all language learners achieve greater levels of reading fluency and comprehension. It is interesting to note that experts recommend silent reading as a tool for building fluency. Learners should be encouraged to read the same material multiple times and to read for understanding. In addition, students should be given time to engage in silent reading prior to reading orally. Drama and poetry are excellent choices for this type of skill-building activity. However, any text that your students encounter could be approached the same way. Choral reading, or having an entire class or small group of students read aloud as a choir of voices, is also a powerful strategy for fluency development. Echo reading, or having whole groups repeat language that has been modeled for them, is another great strategy. Finally, partner reading, working one-on-one with a more advanced or same level classmate, can really keep students on task while practicing fluency by empowering them to engage with text and with their peers. These activities can all reduce a struggling reader's anxiety while allowing him to focus more extensively on fluency development. Though it is a fairly common practice, randomly selecting students to read aloud or assigning sections by seat row or number is not recommended as a fluency development strategy. If you observe struggling students during such an activity, you may notice that they tend to hyper-focus on the section for which they will be responsible, at the expense of the remaining text. This ultimately limits the individual's oral fluency practice to less than 3 minutes of the entire time allotted for the activity, and does not adequately foster comprehension with respect to the target concepts and vocabulary that your students will need to know in order to successfully master the Oklahoma academic standards. While this type of read-aloud activity is a useful classroom management strategy, it does not serve students well academically. When a student sounds out a word, he is applying knowledge of letter-sound relationships. This is commonly referred to as decoding. Helping students understand these relationships through both explicit and implicit instruction may be necessary in classrooms where learners are working in their non-native language. Since English words often do not sound like they are spelled, it is useful to help students make these connections by modeling target language, both orally and in writing. Researchers have found that an ELL's ability to hear sounds produced in spoken language are in some cases contingent upon whether those same sounds exist in his native language. Another point to consider is that in languages such as Chinese, Thai, and Vietnamese, slight variations in pitch can completely change the meaning of a word. It is wise to be cognizant of such differences so that you can identify and respond to the needs of your linguistically diverse learners. Helping students decode words can involve brainstorming lists of similar spelling patterns or rhyming words, explicitly teaching relationships between spelling and pronunciation, segmenting or blending word parts to analyze how certain letter groupings affect word meaning and pronunciation, and playing with nonsense words that require students to analyze letter sounds and relationships. These activities can help ELLs and other struggling readers improve their language and literacy skills, but they can also be used to help intermediate and advanced learners decode scientific or academic terms through critical thinking and the effective use of prior knowledge. These sorts of activities can be done as bell ringers or during any other free time that you have with your students. What's more, they're an excellent way to turn those last 5 restless minutes of class into meaningful instructional time. A final element of fluency that requires our attention is punctuation. For ELLs, punctuation can be really confusing because its use varies by language. Unless you speak Vietnamese, you probably had no idea about the relationship between the punctuation used in that sample of the Frost poem and the way that it would inform fluent pronunciation of that sentence. Clearly, punctuation matters. In Arabic, for example, a colon always precedes the first quotation mark in a quoted statement, and the comma curves in the opposite direction of the English comma. Korean and Chinese, among other languages, do not use any capital letters. When working with ELLs, it is important to teach punctuation explicitly and highlight its use. Provide a print-rich environment filled with well-modeled written language. Help students compare and contrast punctuation use between their 2 languages, and read aloud to students, modeling fluency as it relates to the punctuation found within the text. Elements of fluency work in tandem to help students derive meaning from written text. If you use instructional conversations to highlight the way punctuation, word choice, or character development in works of fiction can influence the way written English is meant to be read, then you're engaging your students in this valuable literacy skill. Here are a few important things to keep in mind about fluent readers. Fluent readers recognize the words and comprehend their overall meaning at the same time. Since fluent readers don't have to concentrate on decoding the actual words, they can focus their attention on what the text actually means. Fluent readers can make mental connections throughout the text, as well as apply those connections to their personal backgrounds and experiences. Although some readers identify words well when those words are alone or on a list, they may not be able to read those same words fluently when they appear in a passage of text. This takes training and practice. Now that we've explored ways to help students improve their reading fluency, take a moment to critically evaluate the list you've generated while participating in this lesson. Using the graphic organizer that you've created for this lesson, score each strategy listed on a scale of 1 to 5 according to how many times per week you incorporate it into your standards-based lesson planning and delivery. Based on what you've learned in this module, do you think your students are getting sufficient exposure to this skill set? What new strategies might you incorporate into your teaching to foster fluency development in your diverse classroom? I hope this video has provided you with a new perspective from which to approach instruction. Let's take a look at fluency instruction at work in an Oklahoma public school.